The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit at the raw skin of her knuckles and claws that scraped down her spine. Alara hunched lower over the stone floor, her thin wool tunic offering as much protection as a spider's web against the biting draft that snaked through the great hall of the Blackwood Pack. Her world had shrunk to the flagstones in front of her, slick with icy water and smelling of lye soap and misery. Each circular motion of her brush sent a fresh wave of pain through her chapped hands. They were a geography of her life, mapped with scars from burns and cuts, the skin perpetually cracked and bleeding. She was an omega, the lowest of the low. An orphan whose parents had been exiled for challenging the Alpha's authority years ago, leaving her behind as a convenient and free servant. They called her Ghost, a fitting name, she often thought. She was invisible, a whisper of movement in the background of other, more important lives. She fetched and carried, scrubbed and mended, and ate the scraps left after everyone else was full. Hunger was a constant, dull ache in her belly, a familiar companion in the long, cold nights. She was nothing. A hollowed-out girl filled only with the echoes of cruel words and the gnawing chill of loneliness. There was no hope for a different life. Omegas did not get mates. They did not find love. They served until they were too old or too broken, and then they were simply gone. A sharp kick to her ribs sent her sprawling sideways. The bucket of filthy water tipped, sending a foul-smelling wave across the stones she had just finished cleaning. Pain exploded in her sides, sharp and blinding, stealing the air from her lungs. "Clumsy wretch," a voice sneered from above. Lyra, the Alpha's daughter. Her blonde hair was a perfect, shining halo, her face a mask of bored cruelty. She stood with her friends, their laughter like the chipping of ice. "Look at the mess you've made." Again. Alara pushed herself up, biting her tongue to keep from crying out. The taste of blood, coppery and sharp, filled her mouth. She didn't look at Lyra. Looking at them only made it worse. It invited more direct torment. "I asked you a question, Omega," Lyra purred, nudging Alara's shoulder with the pointed toe of her fur-lined boot. "Are you deaf as well as useless?" "No, Lyra," Alara whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. Her gaze remained fixed on the spreading puddle, a new disaster to contain. "Then clean it up," Lyra commanded, a flick of her wrist dismissing Alara entirely. "And when you're done with that, the Alpha wants the North Kennels mucked out. He says the stench is offending his prized hounds." She paused, a smirk twisting her perfect lips. "Fitting work for you, I think." Her friends giggled again as they swept away, their vibrant clothes a stark contrast to Alara's drab, patched gray. The heavy oak doors of the hall slammed shut behind them, leaving Alara in the echoing silence, the cold, and the spreading mess. For a long moment, she didn't move. The pain in her ribs was a hot, insistent throb. Despair, thick and suffocating, pressed down on her. It would have been so easy to just lie there, to let the cold seep into her bones and finally be still. But then, something else stirred. A tiny, stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished. It was a foolish, pointless thing, this will to keep going. It had brought her nothing but more pain, more days just like this one. She gritted her teeth. She would not break. Not here, not for them. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself to her knees. Her hands trembled as she righted the bucket. With a ragged breath that tore at her lungs, she picked up her brush and began to scrub again, pushing the dirty water back towards the drain, one stone at a time. That was all she could do. One stone, and then the next. The wind howled outside, a mournful, rising shriek that promised a storm. The pack's shaman had called it a spirit wind, a blizzard born of dark magic, not of nature. He had warned everyone to stay inside, to bar the doors and feed the hearths. The air itself felt wrong, charged with a predatory energy that made the hairs on Alara's arms stand up. It was a death sentence. That was her first thought when Lyra's beta, a burly male named Fendril, cornered her in the kitchens. His face was set in a mask of grim satisfaction as he delivered the order. "The Alpha's expecting a delivery from the trappers at the northern ridge," he grunted, shoving a thick, oilskin-wrapped package into her hands. "Some rare herbs for the shaman. He wants them before the storm peaks." Alara stared at him, her heart sinking into a cold pit in her stomach. "The northern ridge? But the shaman said, no one is to go out." The wind screamed against the stone walls, rattling the window frames. It was already a whiteout. Fendril shrugged, a malicious glint in his eye. "The Alpha's orders trump a shaman's warnings. He said a worthless Omega is an acceptable risk for such an important task." He leaned closer, his breath sour. "Besides, Lyra thought you could use the fresh air." It was not an errand. It was an execution. They were sending her out into the spirit wind to die. The herbs were a lie, a pretense to cover their cruelty. Everyone knew the trappers would have hunkered down hours ago. There would be no one at the northern ridge. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her numbness. This was different from the kicks and the insults. This was the end. They were finally casting her out for good, into the teeth of a waiting monster. There was no refusing. To disobey a direct order from the Alpha was a death sentence in itself. A quicker one, perhaps, but just as certain. She gave a single, jerky nod, her throat too tight to speak. Fendril shoved an old, threadbare cloak at her. It was thin and offered little more than a symbolic gesture against the fury of the storm. He watched with crossed arms as she pulled it on, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. The moment she stepped outside, the storm hit her like a physical blow. The wind was a solid wall of force, stealing her breath and driving needles of ice into her exposed skin. The world vanished into a swirling vortex of white. Snow and ice plastered her face, blinding her in seconds. She clutched the useless package to her chest and forced one foot in front of the other, leaning into the gale. The path to the ridge was gone, buried under rapidly deepening drifts. She was navigating by memory and instinct alone, the trees around the pack compound already fading into ghostly, skeletal shapes. Why was she even trying? Why not just lie down and let it be over? The thought was a seductive whisper in the wind's howl. It would be so much easier. A final surrender. But that stubborn, stupid ember inside her flared. They wanted her to die. They wanted her to give up, and she would not give them the satisfaction. She would walk until her legs gave out. She would fight until her heart stopped. It was a pointless rebellion, seen by no one, but it was hers. The cold was a thief, stealing the feeling from her feet, then her legs. Her cloak was frozen stiff, a useless shell of ice. The package of fake herbs was long lost, ripped from her numb fingers by a vicious gust. She was lost, stumbling through a white, featureless hell, driven only by a primal need to keep moving. Her body was failing, her vision blurred, dark spots dancing at the edges. She tripped over a hidden root and fell face first into a deep snowdrift. The impact was soft, welcoming. The snow was an insulating blanket, silencing the wind's shriek. It was so warm here, so quiet. This is it, she thought, a strange sense of peace settling over her. This is the end. Her consciousness was fading, slipping away into the soft, white darkness. But as the world went dim, a new sound cut through the storm's roar, a sound of pain, a low, guttural growl that was not animal but something more. It was a sound of immense power brought low, of a king in agony. The sound snagged on her fading awareness, pulling her back from the brink. It was a call of distress, and the kindness that had been beaten but never broken in her responded. Someone else was suffering. With a surge of adrenaline born of her last reserves, she pushed herself out of the snowdrift. The cold slammed back into her, a brutal shock to her system. She staggered forward, following the sound, which grew louder, mixed now with the unnatural crackle of dark energy. She stumbled into a small clearing, shielded from the worst of the wind by a crescent of ancient pines. And she saw him. It was a wolf, but a wolf like none she had ever seen or imagined. He was colossal. His shoulders as high as her head, his fur the color of midnight and silvered with frost. He was caught in a trap, but not one of steel. Shimmering black tendrils of shadow, pulsing with malevolent energy, were wrapped around his left foreleg, digging deep and smoking where they touched his flesh. The scent of ozone and burnt fur filled the air. Even in his trapped and wounded state, the power radiating from him was staggering. It was ancient and absolute, a force of nature that dwarfed the storm raging around them. This was no mere wolf. This was something else entirely. His head was low, his breath coming in ragged pants that plumed in the frigid air. As she watched, he lunged against the shadowy bonds, a roar of pure fury tearing from his throat. The tendrils flared, tightening their grip, and he slumped back with a pained whine. Fear told her to run. Every instinct screamed that she was in the presence of a predator beyond her comprehension. But she saw the agony in his posture, heard it in his breath. He was trapped. He was hurt. And she was the only one here. Her own impending death seemed trivial now. Her life was worthless, but maybe, just maybe, she could use its final moments to do one good thing. To offer a moment of comfort to this magnificent, suffering creature. Slowly, her limbs stiff and clumsy with cold, she moved towards him. He heard her approach, his massive head snapping up. His eyes found her. They were not the eyes of an animal. They were molten gold, intelligent, and blazing with a furious, desperate light. He growled, a low rumble that vibrated in her bones, a clear warning, "Stay back." Alara stopped. She held up her empty, trembling hands. "I won't hurt you," she whispered, her voice immediately snatched away by the wind. She wasn't sure if he could even hear her. I want to help." She took another hesitant step. He watched her, his golden eyes narrowed, tracking her every movement. He was tense, poised to strike, but he didn't. Perhaps he sensed her own weakness, the fact that she was no threat. She was a dying flame in the face of his inferno. The shadow trap was clearly magical, and she had no power to break it. But the wound it had carved into his leg was bleeding freely, a dark stain against the snow. Maybe she could stop that. It was something. Without thinking, she reached down and tore a long strip from the hem of her already ragged tunic. It was a pathetic offering, a flimsy piece of worn wool. She held it out, then knelt in the snow a few feet from him. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Let me help." He remained still, his gaze burning into her. He seemed to be weighing her, judging not just her actions but the intent behind them, the very core of her soul. The intensity of his stare was terrifying, yet she felt no malice from him, only pain and a profound, ancient weariness. Finally, with a soft exhalation of breath, he lowered his head and nudged his wounded leg forward an inch. An invitation. An act of trust. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She crawled closer, the cold of the snow seeping through the knees of her thin trousers. The sheer scale of him was overwhelming up close. The air around him thrummed with power. Reaching out a shaking hand, she gently, tentatively, touched the fur near his wound. The moment her skin made contact with his, the world exploded. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A cataclysmic detonation of energy that erupted from the point of contact. White-hot fire shot up her arm, a searing agony that felt like lightning pouring directly into her veins. A scream was torn from her throat, raw and piercing. The clearing lit up with a blinding flash of silver-gold light, brighter than the sun. The storm, the trees, the snow, everything vanished into the incandescence. Through the torrent of pain, she felt a connection slam into place. A bond forged in that impossible fire, linking her to him, soul to soul. On her wrist, an agony unlike any other bloomed. It felt as if a blacksmith's brand was being pressed into her flesh. She could smell her own skin burning, a horrifying acrid scent mixed with pine and winter ozone. She fell back, clutching her arm, her vision swimming in black spots. The pain was absolute, eclipsing the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion. It was everything. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard a sound like shattering glass. The shadow tendrils holding the great wolf exploded into 1,000 dissipating wisps of darkness. He was free. As her vision cleared, she saw him, but he was no longer a wolf. Standing where the creature had been was a man. He was impossibly tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the storm. He was naked, his body a breathtaking landscape of corded muscle and old, silvery scars. His skin seemed to steam in the frigid air, radiating a palpable heat. His hair was a wild mane of black shot through with silver, dusted with snow. And his eyes. They were the same eyes from the wolf. Molten gold, ringed with the silver of a winter moon, and they were fixed on her with an expression of raw, stunned disbelief. Of awe. He took a step towards her, his movements fluid and predatory. Alara scrambled backwards, her mind reeling, unable to process what was happening. A wolf. A man. The fire. The pain. He saw the mark on her wrist. She was still clutching it, cradling her arm to her chest. Peeking from between her fingers was a symbol, newly burned into her skin, glowing with a soft, silvery light. It looked like a crescent moon, its points sharp, entwined with the radiant rays of a rising sun. A low sound rumbled in his chest, a sound of profound, earth-shaking recognition. He looked from the mark to her face, his golden gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "You," he breathed, his voice deep as thunder and soft as falling snow. The single word held 1,000 years of searching, of waiting, of loneliness. He took another step, closing the distance between them. He knelt before her, his massive frame eclipsing her small one. He was a god of winter and wilderness, and she was a half-frozen wisp of a girl. Gently, with a reverence that defied his terrifying power, he reached out and took her hand, his fingers dwarfing hers. His touch was not cold, but blazingly hot, a furnace against her frozen skin. He carefully moved her other hand away from her wrist, revealing the glowing brand in its entirety. He stared at it for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edges of the mark. The burning sensation had subsided, replaced by a strange, humming warmth that spread up her arm, chasing away the deadly chill. It felt right. terrifyingly, impossibly right. His gaze lifted from the mark back to her eyes. The raw power in them was tempered now with something else, something fiercely protective, possessive. Mine, he declared. It was not a question or a request. It was a statement of absolute, unchangeable fact. He had laid his claim. The world had shifted on its axis. Nothing would ever be the same. Alara could only stare, her mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. Her body, however, betrayed her. At his touch, at his word, the small, stubborn ember of life inside her that had fought so hard to survive didn't just flare. It roared into an inferno, bathing her in a warmth and a feeling of belonging so potent it brought tears to her eyes. Who was this man? What was happening to her? Her entire life had been defined by worthlessness, by being unwanted. Yet this impossible being was looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the universe. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice a low vibration that resonated deep in her soul. He saw the terror and confusion on her face, and a flicker of something gentle softened his harsh features. "Do not be afraid. I have you." He gathered her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. The threadbare cloak, frozen and useless, fell away. He wrapped his own massive body around her, shielding her from the wind. His skin was a furnace, and the heat that poured into her was life itself, chasing the deep, deadly cold from her bones. She should have fought. She should have screamed. But she was too weak, too overwhelmed. And buried beneath the terror was a shocking, traitorous truth. She had never felt so safe in her entire life. She pressed her face against the solid wall of his chest, inhaled the scent of pine and winter storms and something else, something uniquely him, and let the darkness finally take her. When she woke, it was to warmth, a deep, penetrating warmth that reached all the way to the marrow of her bones. For a moment, she thought she had died, and this was some strange afterlife. The cold had been her constant companion for so long, its absence was a shock. She was lying on a bed of soft, thick furs, and a fire crackled merrily in a rough stone hearth nearby. The air smelled of wood smoke, roasting meat, and that same intoxicating scent of pine in winter that belonged to him. A heavy fur pelt was draped over her, weighing her down in the most comforting way. She pushed herself up on her elbows, her muscles aching as if she'd run 100 miles. She was in a small, crude shelter, a sort of cave or alcove in the rocks, fortified with fallen logs. Through a narrow opening, she could see the storm still raging, a wall of swirling white. And he was there. He sat on a rock near the fire, tending to a piece of meat skewered on a stick. He was dressed now, in simple leather trousers and a dark tunic that stretched taut across his immense shoulders and chest. He had been watching her. His molten gold eyes had not left her since she stirred. The memories came flooding back. The storm, the wolf, the agonizing fire, the brand. She instinctively looked at her wrist. The mark was still there, a delicate, intricate tattoo of silver lines against her skin. It was no longer glowing, but it hummed with a faint, latent energy, a warmth that connected her to him. "You are awake," he stated, his voice calm and deep. He pulled the meat from the fire and placed it on a flat stone to cool. "Eat. You need your strength." Alara shrank back into the furs. Her fear returned, sharp and immediate. He was real. This was all real. Who are you?" she whispered. He turned his full attention to her. The sheer force of his presence was enough to make the air feel thick. "My name is Kale," he said. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern clans." Alpha King. The name was a legend, a myth whispered by the elders, a being of immense power who ruled over all the shifter packs in the vast, untamed north. A king older than any living memory. He was supposed to be a ghost story, a figure of terrifying power who lived 1,000 leagues away, not a man in a cave. "And you," he continued, his gaze intense, "are my mate." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and unbelievable. "No," she said, the denial automatic, reflexive. That's not possible. I'm an Omega. I'm nothing." The words came out choked with the ingrained shame of her life. His expression hardened. A dangerous light flared in his golden eyes. "Who told you that you were nothing?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low, perilous growl. It was the sound of a predator scenting a threat to its most prized possession. She flinched, pulling the furs tighter around herself. "Everyone. My pack? The Blackwood pack?" "They are fools," Kale stated simply, dismissing her entire world with a single sentence. "The bond does not lie. It has chosen. You are mine. You are Luna. You are queen." Her mind couldn't accept it. Queen? Her? The girl who scrubbed floors and ate scraps? It was a cruel joke, a dream from which she would wake up, cold and alone on the stone floor. "I don't understand," she stammered, shaking her head. "The mark, it burned." "It is a claiming mark," he explained, his voice softening slightly as he saw her distress. "It appears when a bond as old and as powerful as ours is finally forged. It burned because of the power that lay dormant within you, answering my own. It is a part of you now, a part of us." He stood and walked towards her, his steps silent and sure. He stopped by the edge of the furs and held out the piece of roasted meat. It was steaming, its rich scent making her stomach clench with a hunger so fierce it was painful. "Sit down," he said. It was a command, but it was spoken with a gentleness that brooked no argument. "Eat." Torn between fear and a desperate animal need, she slowly sat up. She took the meat from his hand, her fingers brushing against his. A jolt, like a tiny echo of the first fiery connection, shot up her arm. She gasped. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. She ate like a starving animal, tearing at the meat with her teeth, not caring that it was hot enough to burn her tongue. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. When she was finished, she looked up to find him still watching her, a strange, haunted softness in his eyes. "I have been alone for a very long time, Alara," he said, speaking her name for the first time. He knew her name. How did he know her name? 500 years, waiting for the other half of my soul, waiting for you. 500 years. The number was incomprehensible. He had been walking the world for centuries while she had not even existed. The chasm between them was too vast. "Why me?" she asked, the question a raw whisper. "There's nothing special about me." His smile was a rare, breathtaking thing, like the sun breaking through a storm. It transformed his harsh, predatory features into something devastatingly beautiful. "You are wrong," he said. "You have a heart strong enough to show kindness to a dying beast in a blizzard that was meant to kill you. You have a fire inside you that you do not yet understand. You are anything but nothing." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of her matted hair behind her ear. His touch was a brand, a promise. The ones who hurt you will answer to me. But that is for later. For now you will rest, you will heal, and you will stay by my side. His words washed over her, a confusing tide of terror and hope. Part of her, the part that had been kicked and starved and broken, screamed that this was a trap, a fantasy. But another part, the part that felt the warm hum of the mark on her wrist and the undeniable pull towards him, desperately wanted to believe. For the first time in her life, someone was looking at her and seeing not a worthless Omega, but a queen. Cale did not press her further. He seemed to understand that she was a wild, wounded thing that needed time and space. He returned to the fire, leaving her to the warmth of the furs and the turmoil of her own thoughts. He was a force of nature, an ancient king, and he had claimed her. What was happening to her? And what would happen when the storm finally broke? They spent 2 days in the cave while the spirit wind howled its fury outside. Cale was a quiet, constant presence. He hunted, bringing back more game that he cooked for her, insisting she eat until she was full for the first time in memory. He tended the fire, his large frame filling the small space with an aura of unshakable calm and lethal power. He spoke little, but when he did, it was to answer her hesitant questions. He told her of the bond, the fated connection between shifter mates that was a legend even among their kind, a soul-deep pairing that transcended choice. He explained that the shadow trap that had caught him was the work of an ancient enemy, a faction that called themselves the Ember Covenant, who sought to usurp his throne and plunge the clans into darkness. Alara listened, absorbing the information like a dry sponge. It all felt like a story, a myth happening to someone else. The only thing that felt truly real was the constant warm thrum of the mark on her wrist, a physical anchor to this new, impossible reality. And the way her heart beat faster whenever Cale's golden eyes met hers. She found herself watching him, the way he moved with such silent grace, the power coiled in his shoulders even when he was at rest, the profound loneliness she sometimes saw in his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. He was a paradox of brutal strength and surprising gentleness. On the third morning, she woke to silence. The wind had died. The storm was over. Cale was already standing at the entrance to the cave, looking out at a world reborn in glittering white under a pale sun. "It is time to go," he said without turning. "My warriors will be searching. We will meet them on the plains." He turned to her, and for the first time, he offered her a true choice. "You will come with me, Alara, to my home, to your home." It was a statement, but his eyes held a question. Her old life was a nightmare. The Blackwood Pack had tried to kill her. There was nothing for her there but more pain and a slow, miserable death. Here, with this terrifying, magnificent man, was a sliver of hope. A terrifying, dangerous hope, but hope nonetheless. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "I'll come with you." A flicker of relief, deep and profound, crossed his face. He gave her a sharp, approving nod. Good. He gave her a new set of clothes he had carried in a pack, soft leather trousers, a warm wool tunic, and a thick, fur-lined cloak that felt like heaven against her skin. They were too large, but they were clean and whole. Dressed in them, she felt like a different person. As they prepared to leave, a flash of movement in the trees caught Alara's eye. She saw a figure, bundled in dark furs, darting away through the deep snow. It was too far to see a face, but the furtive haste of the retreat sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Someone had been watching them. What is it? Cale asked, his senses far sharper than hers. He was instantly alert, his body tensing. I saw someone, she said, pointing. Over there. They ran when we came out. Cale's eyes narrowed, his gaze sweeping the forest. A low growl rumbled in his chest. One of your old pack, no doubt. Sent to confirm your death. His jaw tightened. They have confirmed something else instead. He looked down at her, at the mark on her wrist, partially visible beneath her sleeve. They have seen the mate of the Alpha King. They will run back to their cowardly alpha with the news. This complicates things. The watcher was Lyra, consumed with a jealous rage that Alara had not only survived, but seemed to have been rescued. She had defied the lingering storm to track her. From a hidden vantage point, she had seen it all. The impossibly powerful man, the way he cared for the Omega scum. And most damningly, she had caught a clear glimpse of the glowing brand on Alara's wrist as he held her hand. She knew the legends. She knew what that mark meant. The worthless, pathetic ghost of their pack was the fated mate of a king. The injustice of it burned in her gut like poison. That should have been her. She was an alpha's daughter, beautiful and strong, not Alara. Never Alara. Fury gave her speed. She fled back through the snow, not to the main pack hall, but to a secluded lodge where her father, Alpha Valerius, met with his true masters. Valerius was an ambitious, cruel man who had long chafed under the distant rule of the Alpha King. His secret alliance with the Ember Covenant and their shadowy leader, Morgrath, promised him greater power. She burst into the smoky room, where Valerius sat with two figures cloaked in black, their faces hidden in shadow. "She's alive!" Lyra gasped, her chest heaving. "The Omega! She's with a man, a king, I think. He has a mark on her." Valerius's eyes widened. He grabbed his daughter by the shoulders. "What kind of mark?" "A claiming mark," she cried. "Silver on her wrist, glowing. He called her his mate." The two cloaked figures stirred. One of them leaned forward, his voice a dry, rasping whisper that sounded like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "The Alpha King, Cale. The prophecies spoke of this, that his mate would be the key to his undoing." Valerius's face twisted into a cruel, triumphant smile. The worthless Omega he had tried to discard had just become the most valuable pawn on the board. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Heading north across the plains," Lyra said, a vicious satisfaction blooming in her chest. "She is with him now." "She will not be for long," the second cloaked figure said. His voice was deeper, colder. "Lord Morgrath will be pleased. A weapon has just been delivered into our hands. We will take the girl. Cale is powerful, but his mate is his weakness. He will come for her, and when he does, we will be waiting." Alara knew nothing of the plot her discovery had set in motion. She walked beside Cale across the endless, glittering expanse of the snow-covered plains. For the first time, she was not looking at the ground. She was looking at the vast blue sky, the distant, jagged peaks of the northern mountains. Cale's home, his kingdom, her new life. The sheer scale of the world was dizzying. Her entire existence had been confined to the dark, oppressive halls of the Blackwood Pack. Out here, the air was clean and sharp, and the freedom was intoxicating. Cale set a relentless pace, but he was always mindful of her. When she stumbled in the deep snow, his hand was there to steady her. He shared his rations with her, and at night, he built a shelter and a fire, wrapping her in furs and his own body heat as they slept under the stars. During these long hours, she started to talk. Timidly at first, then with more confidence, she told him of her life. The endless chores, the casual cruelty, the gnawing loneliness. She spoke of her parents, shadowy figures from a past she barely remembered. Cale listened in absolute silence, his jaw tight, a muscle clenching in his cheek. A storm of cold, lethal fury gathered in his golden eyes. When she finished, the silence stretched, thick with his rage. "Everyone who ever laid a hand on you," he said, his voice a low, chilling promise, "will die. Everyone who spoke a cruel word will beg for a mercy they will not receive. I swear this on my soul, Alara." A tremor of fear and a shocking thrill of vindication went through her. No one had ever stood up for her. No one had ever cared. The ferocity of his protectiveness was terrifying and deeply, addictively comforting. They were a day's journey from the foothills of his territory when the attack came. They had stopped to rest in a copse of birch trees when the air grew still and heavy. The birds fell silent. Cale was on his feet in an instant, pushing her behind him. "Stay back," he commanded, his body radiating immense power. His eyes glowed with golden light as he scanned the trees. They emerged from the shadows like wraiths, a dozen of them, dressed in black leather and fur, their faces grim. Alara recognized them. Fendril was there, Lyra's beta. The others were the strongest warriors from the Blackwood pack, her tormentors. "Valeria sends his regards, Your Majesty," Fendril sneered, though his eyes were wide with fear at the sight of Cale. "He asks that you return his property." He gestured towards Alara. Cale's laughter was a short, brutal bark. "She is not your property. She is your queen. You have made a fatal mistake coming here." "She is an Omega," Fendril spat, trying to regain his bravado. "And our Lord Morgrath has a use for her. Take them!" The warriors surged forward. Cale met them not as a man, but as a force of nature. He moved in a blur of speed and violence. There was a snap of bone as he broke Fendril's neck with one swift motion. He disarmed another warrior and gutted him with his own blade. It was not a fight. It was a slaughter. Alara watched in terrified awe. This was the other side of him. Not the gentle protector, but the ruthless king. He dispatched her former pack members with brutal, efficient grace. His movements a deadly dance. But there were too many. While he was engaged with the main group, two more emerged from behind them. Before Cale could turn, before Alara could even scream a warning, they grabbed her. A thick, coarse bag was thrown over her head, plunging her into suffocating darkness. She felt a sharp prick in her neck, and a strange, cold numbness began to spread through her veins. A tranquilizer. Her struggles became weak and sluggish. She heard Cale roar her name, a sound of pure, world-breaking fury. But his voice sounded distant, fading. She was dragged away, her feet stumbling. She felt the cold press of metal against her skin as chains were wrapped around her wrists. Silver. The moment the metal touched the claiming mark, a new kind of agony, sharp and searing, erupted in her arm. It was a cold fire, a chilling void that felt like it was trying to sever her very soul. Through the bond, she felt Cale's own agony mirror hers, a psychic scream of pain and rage at their forced separation. The last thing she heard before the drug pulled her under was his desperate, fading howl echoing across the plains. She awoke in utter darkness. The cold was back, a deep, seeping chill that felt malevolent. She was lying on a stone floor, damp and gritty. The heavy scent of mildew, old blood, and dark magic filled her nostrils. A dungeon. Pain was her entire world. Her head throbbed from the drug, but that was nothing compared to the agony in her wrists. She tried to move her hands and cried out as the silver chains binding her to the wall bit into her flesh. The silver felt like it was actively poisoning her, sending waves of nauseating cold through the bond, which had become a source of torment instead of comfort. The connection to Cale was still there, but it was frayed, stretched thin and taut across a vast distance. It was a conduit for shared pain. She could feel his frantic rage, his fear for her, a desperate, clawing helplessness that was so alien to his nature it terrified her more than anything else. He was hunting. He was coming. But he was so far away. A heavy door scraped open, and torchlight spilled into the cell, making her flinch. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and draped in black robes embroidered with glowing red embers. He radiated an aura of cold, ancient evil that made the power she felt from Kyle seem like a warm summer sun. This was a being of pure shadow, of death and decay. "So," the figure said, his voice the dry rasp of a forgotten tomb, "this is the little flame that has captured the great Alpha King's heart." He stepped into the cell, and the torchlight illuminated his face. He was unnaturally pale, his skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. His eyes held no light at all. They were pits of absolute darkness that seemed to drink the light from the room. This had to be Morgrath. He glided towards her, his movements silent and unnerving. He crouched down, studying her as one might study an interesting insect. His soulless gaze fell upon the silver chains. "Crude, but effective," he mused. "Silver, the great equalizer. It dampens the connection, does it not? Turns your precious bond into an instrument of torture. He feels every bit of this, you know. Every wave of cold, every spike of pain. It is distracting him, clouding his senses, making him reckless." Alara pressed herself back against the damp wall, trying to get away from him, from his chilling presence and the dead void of his eyes. "What do you want?" she forced out, her voice trembling. Morgrath smiled, a thin, bloodless slash in his pale face. "What every sensible man of power wants, my dear. More. Cale has ruled for too long. His reign has been one of light and balance. I prefer a world of shadow and fear, a world where the strong take what they want, and the weak, like you, serve or perish." He reached out a long, skeletal finger and traced the air just above the claiming mark on her wrist. A jolt of icy energy shot through her, and she cried out. "This," he said, his dark eyes gleaming with avarice, "is the key. The bond between an Alpha King and his true mate is a conduit of immense power. Power I intend to claim. We will begin a ritual. We will use you as a siphon, drawing his strength, his very life force, through the bond and into me. By the time he finally finds you, he will be a hollowed-out shell, and I will be supreme." He stood, looming over her. "And you? You will have the honor of being the instrument of his destruction. Fitting, is it not? That the one thing he has waited centuries for will be the very thing that destroys him. That his love will be his ruin." Despair, absolute and soul-crushing, washed over her. He was going to use her to kill Cale. Her, the worthless Omega, would be the downfall of a king. The cruelty of it was a physical blow. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with the grime. Morgrath chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Weep, little one. It will not change a thing. Your part in this is almost over." He turned and swept out of the cell, the heavy door slamming shut behind him, plunging her back into darkness and agony. She was alone with the pain and the suffocating despair. He was right. She was worthless. She was a weapon aimed at the heart of the only person who had ever shown her kindness, who had ever looked at her and seen something of value. The bond, once a source of hope, was now a curse. No, the word was not her own. It was a thought, a feeling that slammed into her mind through the battered connection. It was KL. Hold on. His voice, his presence, was a lifeline in the sea of her despair. It was filled with a rage so pure and absolute it was a tangible force. I feel you. I feel what they are doing. I am coming, Alara. By my soul, I am coming. Just hold on. The connection was weak, fraught with the static of pain and distance, but it was there. He was there. He had not given up. A flicker of her own stubborn fire rekindled in the depths of her soul. Morgrath was wrong. She was not just an instrument. She was Alara. And Kale was coming for her. She would not let this be the end. She would fight. Clenching her teeth against the agony of the silver, she focused on the thread connecting her to Kale. She held on to it with everything she had, a silent promise sent across the miles. I am here. I am waiting. The ritual began in a vast circular chamber deep beneath the fortress. The air was thick with the stench of blood and burning herbs. The floor was covered in a complex array of runes, all converging on a stone altar in the center of the room. This was where they chained her. Her thin tunic had been torn away, leaving her in a simple linen shift. The silver chains on her wrists were connected to heavier ones bolted to the altar, forcing her to kneel. Morgrath stood before her, flanked by his cloaked covenant priests. Lyra and her father Valerius stood off to the side, their faces alight with greedy anticipation. "The preparations are complete, Lord Morgrath," one of the priests rasped. "The convergence is at its peak. His power will flow through the conduit." Morgrath raised his hands. "Let the unmaking begin!" The priests began to chant, their voices a discordant, grating drone that made the stones vibrate. The runes on the floor began to glow with a sickly red light. The energy in the room intensified, a crushing weight that stole the breath from Alara's lungs. The claiming mark on her wrist flared with agonizing pain. But this time, it was different. She felt a pulling sensation, a violent drawing of energy through the bond, through her. She could feel Kale's strength, his life force, being tugged from him across the miles, siphoned through her and into the glowing runes. She screamed, a sound of pure agony, not just for herself, but for him. She could feel him fighting it, a desperate, roaring denial against the magical pull, but the ritual was too strong. Then, the fortress shook. A deafening crash echoed from above, the sound of a mountain breaking. The chanting faltered. Dust and stone rained down from the ceiling. Another crash, closer this time. It was the sound of a wall being pulverized. A roar of fury, inhuman and full of the promise of bloody vengeance, echoed down the corridors. It was Kale. "He is here!" Valerius shouted, his face paling. "Impossible! How did he find us so fast?" "It does not matter," Morgrath hissed, his face a mask of fury. "He is too late. Double the incantation. Draw it all from him now." The priests renewed their chant, their voices frantic. The pull on Alara's soul intensified. She felt Kale's strength falter, a wave of dizziness and weakness washing over him and through him to her. He was weakening. The ritual was working. The great doors to the chamber exploded inward, blasted into splinters by a wave of raw power. Kale stood there, framed in the ruined doorway. He was no longer the calm king. He was a god of wrath. His golden eyes were blazing infernos. His face was a mask of cold, murderous rage. Behind him stood his warriors, a tide of gray fur and gleaming steel. "Morgrath!" Kale's voice was a crack of thunder. He saw Alara chained to the altar, and his rage escalated into something apocalyptic. The very air around him seemed to warp and shimmer. A massive battle erupted. Kale's warriors, the elite Silverfangs, crashed into the Ember Covenant priests and the Blackwood guards. The chamber became a whirlwind of desperate, brutal combat. Kale ignored everyone else. He had eyes only for Morgrath. He launched himself across the room, a blur of motion. But Morgrath was ready. He threw up a shield of shadow energy, and Kale slammed into it with the force of a battering ram. The shield buckled, but held. "You are weakened, old wolf," Morgrath taunted, as Kale staggered back. "Your love has already bled you. You came for your mate, and you have walked into your own grave." Morgrath gestured, and a dozen of the Blackwood warriors, Valerius among them, swarmed Kale. The Alpha King fought with the fury of a cornered god, but the siphoning ritual was taking its toll. His movements were a fraction slower, his power slightly diminished. He fought them off, but it was a struggle. Morgrath watched, a cruel smile on his lips, as a lucky sword stroke from Valerius slipped past Kale's guard and sliced deep into his side. Kale roared in pain and rage, lashing out and sending Valerius flying across the room to crash against a stone pillar. But the damage was done. Kale dropped to one knee, clutching his bleeding side, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The golden light in his eyes flickered. Alara saw him fall. She saw the blood, the flicker of his light, and something inside her shattered. The fear, the pain, the self-doubt, the years of abuse. It all burned away in a single incandescent moment, consumed by a volcanic eruption of pure, protective rage. He was her mate, her king, the only person who had ever seen her, and they were killing him. "No!" The word was not a scream. It was a shockwave, a detonation of pure power that erupted from the very core of her being. A column of brilliant, blinding white light erupted from her, engulfing the altar. The light was not hot. It was pure, a cleansing elemental force of creation and life. The silver chains on her wrists didn't just break, they sublimated, turning to vapor in the face of a power they could not contain. The red runes on the floor were scoured clean, replaced by the overwhelming, cleansing radiance. The priest's chant was cut off as the light wave hit them, and they simply dissolved. Their dark magic annihilated. The entire ritual collapsed. The siphoning pull on Kale vanished, and in its place, a wave of warm, healing energy washed over him, flowing from Alara through the bond. He felt the light knit his wound, pour strength back into his weary limbs. He looked up, his golden eyes wide with awe, as his mate, his quiet, gentle Alara, was wreathed in a corona of holy fire. The wave of light blasted outwards, selectively avoiding Kale's warriors but slamming into the remaining Covenant members. They screamed as the pure energy purified them into ash. In seconds, the battle was over. Only Morgrath, Lyra, and a stunned Kale and his men remained. Alara stood, her feet bare on the stone, her slight frame radiating an impossible power. The light swirled around her, coalescing, obeying her unspoken will. Her eyes were no longer the soft gray of a timid girl. They were pools of liquid starlight, glowing with an ancient, formidable power. Morgrath stared, his composure finally broken, his face a mask of disbelief and fear. What are you?" he stammered. Alara's gaze fixed on him, cold and absolute. She took a step towards him, the light flowing with her. "You called me a worthless Omega," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound power, clear and strong as a silver bell. You called me a key, a conduit. You were wrong. She raised a hand and the light gathered there, a miniature sun pulsing in her palm. I am Alara. I am the daughter of the moon and the sister of the sun, and I am his queen. With a final declarative cry, she thrust her hand forward. A beam of pure, concentrated light shot across the room and struck Morgrath square in the chest. He shrieked, a high, thin sound of utter agony as the light consumed his darkness. He dissolved not into ash, but into nothingness, his evil essence utterly and completely unmade. Silence fell in the chamber. The only sound was the soft, humming crackle of the fading light around Alara. Lyra, who had been hiding behind a pillar, stared in catatonic horror, her mind broken by what she had witnessed. The light receded, sinking back into Alara, leaving her standing there, trembling in the aftermath of its passage. The power drained away, and she swayed, her own strength spent. Before she could fall, Cale was there. He swept her up into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. His wound was gone, his strength returned. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body trembling with relief and awe. Alara, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled back, his hands framing her face, his golden eyes searching hers. They were filled with a love so profound, so absolute, it took her breath away. I knew there was a fire in you. I did not know you held the sun. Tears of relief, of shock, of overwhelming love streamed down her face. I saw them hurt you, she whispered. I wouldn't let them. You saved me, he said, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. You saved us all. He leaned down and kissed her, not with the fierce possession of their first meeting, but with a deep, soul-shaking reverence. It was a kiss of equals, a king and his queen. She melted against him, all the fear and pain finally washing away, replaced by the solid, unshakable truth of his presence. He was here. They were safe. They were together. She reached up, her hand trembling slightly, and laid it on her own wrist over the claiming mark. It pulsed with a steady, warm light. Then she moved her hand, pressing her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. She pushed her own will, her own love, her own claim into the bond. A gasp escaped Cale's lips. A brilliant silver gold light flared from beneath her hand. When she pulled it away, a new mark was emblazoned on his skin, a perfect mirror of her own, a radiant sun, its rays entwined with the sharp points of a crescent moon. The bond was no longer just his claim on her. It was complete. It was theirs. He looked down at the mark on his chest, then back at her, his expression one of utter devotion. Mine, he said, his voice thick. Mine, she answered, her voice sure and steady. They returned to the north not as a king and his rescued damsel, but as a king and his queen, united and whole. Cale's kingdom was nestled in a vast hidden valley, warmed by geothermal springs, a paradise of green amidst the snow-capped peaks. The capital city was built into the mountainside itself, a breathtaking structure of white stone and dark wood, alive with banners and people. Cale led her into the great hall, a chamber far grander and brighter than the one she had spent her life scrubbing. It was filled with his people, the warriors of the northern clans, their families, their children. Hundreds of them, All gathered, their faces turned towards the dais. He led her to the center of the platform, his hand holding hers tightly. The hall fell silent, 1,000 pairs of eyes on her. The old Alara would have shrunk, would have tried to become invisible. But she was not the old Alara. She stood tall, her head held high, and met their gazes. Kale raised their joined hands, showing them the matching marks. "People of the North!" His voice boomed, echoing through the vast hall. "For 500 years, our throne has been half empty. For 500 years, I have waited for the other half of my soul. The waiting is over." His golden eyes found hers, full of love and pride. "I present to you Ilara, my mate, your Luna, your queen." For a heartbeat there was silence. Then the hall exploded. A single, unified roar of acclamation shook the very foundations of the mountain. They cheered, they stamped their feet, they howled their approval to the rafters. They were not just accepting her, they were celebrating her. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the banners, at the light streaming through the high windows. She looked at the magnificent, powerful man beside her, the king who had seen a queen in a worthless servant girl. She was no longer Ghost. She was no longer nothing. She was Alara, the light of the north, the mate of the Alpha King. She was strong. She was powerful. She was loved. She was home.